All right, we're going to get started here today. Welcome everyone to our February Lunch and Learn Economic Development Update in Southeastern Wisconsin with M7. Just going to go through a couple of slides here to get us started. First of all, we thank Landmark Credit Union for being the presenting sponsor of our Lunch and Learn series. We're going to go until 1 o'clock p.m. today. We've got about 30 minutes of presentation, and then we'll leave between 15 and 25 minutes for questions and answers, which you can ask throughout the program. Our Lunch and Learn series highlights members, companies, and initiatives, and we cover a variety of content and a variety of industries. So if you have any ideas for a Lunch and Learn program, please let us know. And a little bit of housekeeping here. All attendees are on mute and your videos are disabled. We encourage you to use the chat function, the question and answer. You can raise your hand or you can text me if you have a question. Again, our presenting sponsor for the series is Landmark Credit Union. And also displayed here is all of our annual sponsors to whom we are so grateful for their support. Also want to give you a little bit of an overview of what we have coming up, a variety of virtual and small group in-person events. We just announced our March Madness event, which will be in full CDC compliance, taking place on March 19th. It's a year of many changes, and as such, our event is also changing. So now I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Kyle Fink of Colliers to introduce our presenter for today's program.
Awesome. Thanks, Tracy. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kyle Fink. I'm an advisor with Colliers Industrial Services Group, and I have the privilege of introducing our speaker today, Jim Paetsch. Jim is the Vice President for Corporate Relocation, Expansion, and Attraction for the Milwaukee 7. For those who don't know, the Milwaukee 7 is a cooperative economic development initiative to grow, retain, and attract business and talent in the 7 counties within the Milwaukee region. We're extremely grateful and excited to learn about Jim's latest efforts and strategies for the future of Southeastern Wisconsin. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Jim.
Terrific. Thanks, Kyle. And Tracy, Amanda, really appreciate the opportunity here to speak to some of the members of CARW. So, the only thing I wish is that all of us were together in person. If you're like me, you're probably sick of having these kinds of meetings. But I did see one interesting thing the other day. I saw a survey, and I think it was on Indeed is where I saw it, that they had surveyed people that had been working from home since the pandemic had started. And they asked them, have you consumed alcohol during the day while you've been at home working? 45% of people said they had consumed alcohol. So I'm calling BS on that one, by the way. If 45% of people admit it, that means it's probably closer to 100%. So all this is my little way of telling you, if you want to open up a cold beer, mix a cocktail here over the lunch hour, that's certainly A-okay by me. So what I'm going to do here, and as Kyle had said, I've got about 30 minutes or so of prepared remarks. We're going to cover the 5 things that you see there on the screen. So one, for those of you who maybe don't know a lot about M7, I'll give you a quick overview of the organization. We'll talk about the results that we've achieved in the years since we were founded. So that goes back to 2005. Secondly, I want to give you a better feel for how we do corporate attraction and expansion and what that looks like on a daily basis. Third, we'll go through some of the recent wins. So these are companies that we've worked with that have chosen to put significant investments and jobs into the region. We'll talk then fourth about some of the things that we have as goals and progress towards those goals for the 2020 to 2024 period, so that 5-year period. And then lastly, we'll close up on some things that we're thinking about here in the future. So about M7. Again, if you're not familiar with us, we are the regional economic development entity for Southeastern Wisconsin. So we're real creative. The 7 in our name refers to the 7 counties that comprise the region. We're a private, nonprofit entity. We're funded primarily by the big companies that are located in Southeastern Wisconsin. So it's the We Energies, Northwestern Mutual, Aurora Healthcare, and many other organizations like them. Very grateful for the corporate support that we get to continue our operation. we're the regional entity, as I said, here in southeastern Wisconsin, but economic development on a larger scale, so specifically in the state of Wisconsin and really across the United States for that matter, has really evolved into a regional game. And this is mostly because that's how companies think. So if a company is thinking about placing an investment somewhere, they don't just leverage the assets that exist in that particular municipality where they may locate. You know, if you're out in Brookfield and you got to send an engineer down to Dallas, that person doesn't fly out of the Brookfield airport. And if you're going to recruit staff, you don't just recruit staff from the city of Brookfield or even Waukesha County for that matter. And so regionalism is really the game here. And it's something, and we look at that as sort of the right unit of analysis in terms of our customers, but really a state is too big. What goes on in Superior or even in the Fox Valley for that matter doesn't have a ton of impact on what goes on down here in terms of how companies think about their operations and maximizing those things. So regionalism is really an important component of economic development these days, and it's certainly something that's spread throughout Wisconsin. A lot of things that M7 works on. My lane of the organization is I oversee corporate attraction and expansion. So I'm not the future land guy. I'm not the guy who's thinking about what southeastern Wisconsin is going to look like 5, 10, 15 years down the road. My job is to take the assets as they exist here today, to find companies that are what we call locationally active and to sell them on making those investments and placing those jobs into our region. So a little bit about our performance metrics so far. So since we were founded, again, goes back to 2005, we have successfully closed 109 corporate attraction and expansion projects. Those projects have generated the metrics that you see there on the screen. So almost 23,000 jobs, about 1.3 billion in annual payroll, and just a shade over 3.1 billion in capital investment. So when we go back to our investors, some of those large companies and others that I mentioned earlier, these are the things that they're interested in, and these are the things that we report out on. So how do we approach this work in the corporate attraction and expansion space? And so I'll take it back to 2005 when we got started. And the statement that you see there on the right-hand side really accurately characterized how we thought about our work. And that was, we should be focusing on helping companies that are already domiciled in southeastern Wisconsin and help them to expand and grow. And this makes a ton of sense. It's always easier to hold on to a customer that you have already versus to try to find a new one. But fast forward then to 2021, and what you see there is, of course, that same statement that corporate expansion is really an important component of our program of work and how we think about the lane of the organization that I'm in. But the other thing that we've added to that is we also think we should be attracting new businesses to the region. So I've been at this since M7 got started, and so I was involved in these conversations all along the way. And one of the things that I actually started to understand over time was there was some code in terms of people making statements about we should only worry about the folks that are here now. And what they were really saying was they didn't believe in this region. They didn't believe that if a company had the whole world open to them in terms of where they were going to place an investment, why would they ever choose southeastern Wisconsin? Well, we don't believe that. We absolutely believe that this is a region that can attract investment, and we think it's actually foolish to leave a portion of opportunity on the table without even attracting it. Now, I'll talk in just a minute about how we look at doing that work because we got to be targeted. But for us, this is not an either or. It's not about attraction versus expansion. You got to do both of those things if you want to be globally competitive, and you have to be able to do them both really well. So I mentioned before the project metrics that we have since our founding. I wanted to just focus in just for a second here on our most recent 5-year campaign. So we do measure progress in these 5-year increments. So the period that we just closed is 2015 to 2019, and you see the metrics there. About 46 project wins, a little over 10,000 jobs. That, by the way, is 32% over the goal that we set. The middle circle is really important to us, and that's the average wage. These jobs had average wage of $60,500. So to put that in perspective, that's about 20% over the average wage in the region. That's how you grow an economy, is you have more income that's here, good jobs, it then disperses out into other areas. So for us, that average wage is really an important component of what we do and something we pay close attention to. Those 10,521 jobs had about 637 million of payroll and almost 2 billion of capital investment. But the thing I wanted to show you here is to break this out and show you what percentage or what portions of those different metrics came from attraction projects. So of those 46 wins, about 24 were in the attraction space, so over half. About a quarter of the jobs, the wage lines up really nicely, a big chunk of payroll. But the other thing that's really important is the capital expenditure. When we attract a new company here, those deals almost by definition have a greater CapEx. And so that then spreads the multipliers further into the community. And so again, attraction is really a sweet spot for us and one that we'll continue to focus on here in the future. So these are some deals that we've worked on over the last number of years. I'm sure everybody on the call here is familiar with each of these four, but the reason I put them up here on the screen is just to show you, again, the attraction and expansion capabilities and how that affects the region. So look at Milwaukee Electric Tool and Komatsu, obviously companies that have long presence, deep presence, here in southeastern Wisconsin. Really pleased that both of those companies have decided to sink their roots even deeper into the region. And we'll talk about those deals a little bit more in just a minute. But then look at the other two deals, Haribo and Nexus. These are two companies that had no presence in southeastern Wisconsin whatsoever. These are companies that we aggressively work to attract to this region. And between the two of them, they're spending almost $600 million in our region. So again, we don't want to leave any opportunities on the table. So for us, expansion and attraction are really important things for us going forward. So what are the different things that are in our toolbox in terms of how we approach a deal and what sorts of functions we might fulfill to get that deal done? You see some of the things that are there on the left-hand side. These are things that typically would come up in a deal. They don't all come up all the time, but it's a pretty good list in terms of the things that we see quite often. But the other thing that I'll tell you is we do whatever is necessary to close the deal. So it would be very unusual for me to start working with a prospect and to start just talking about southeastern Wisconsin. That's just not how we do it. I suspect that's not how any of you approach your prospects either. When we surface an opportunity, we ask a lot of questions and we listen. And so what we're trying to work backwards from is what's it going to take to close that deal? And those are the sorts of activities that we get engaged in. So again, it may be on that list that you see on the left-hand side, it may not, but we're resourced in a way that we can execute whatever activities we need to get the deal done. So I love this picture. I think it's a really good representation of how we approach project management and how we think about the ways in which we work with a prospect once we've surfaced an opportunity. That work is guided by the principles that you see on the right-hand side. So one, it's high touch. Whether we have won or whether we have lost, there is no prospect that would ever say that we weren't interested and that we weren't thorough. We take each one of these leads, we think of each of them as precious, and we work very hard to get to that good outcome for the region. Secondly, our work is coordinated and it's seamless. Most companies do not have patience to deal with 20 or 30 different people as a part of this process. They don't want me to send them to somebody else to get a piece of information. They don't want me to connect them with somebody else for a conversation. What they're expecting is that I'm going to coordinate that. And so for us, it really simplifies the process so that the company can really deal with one entity, and whether it's then bringing in the governor, if it's bringing in the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, different real estate interests, taking a look at supply chain, any number of other factors, being able to just deal with us really makes this easier for the company. Third, it's a focus on winning. And you hear that and you think, well, of course, that's what the focus is. But there are no silver medals in this work. You get a nice pat on the back and a congratulations, but that's about it. So for us, we are always going to be focused on what do we need to do to get that deal? So what do I need to do, for example, to get Haribo to select Southeastern Wisconsin versus any number of other locations around the United States that they were looking at? It makes the work really simple when we organize it that way. It's not a box checking exercise. It's really about winning and getting to a point where the company says, yes, this is the location where I want to invest. Fourth is we try to demystify what can be a complex process. And we work with a lot of pretty sophisticated global companies. These are companies that have operations all over the world. And one of the great things about my job is I get to meet a lot of really smart people. But I'm always a little bit surprised at how they don't actually have a lot of experience with this particular process. Companies don't make big capital investments all that often. Now some do, but most don't. And so going through it can have a number of different landmines that are in that process, ways in which the deal could potentially go south. And so one of the things that we do is we try to show them the way that this process works and how do we get to the best outcome possible. And lastly, it's a commitment to a company's long-term success. In a lot of ways, my job is to get the deal to the press conference. Or press release, it's to sort of get it to that point and then I move on. But one of the things that we've discovered over time, and it's actually a really gratifying part of my job, is that relationship that we've built through number one, through that high touch process. There's now a trust that's there between M7 and this company. And so as they then start to settle themselves into the region, have any number of different challenges that you might expect, we're often a group that they'll call to help. And so I'd say in a given month, probably anywhere from 5 to 20% of my time is actually spent with companies that are part of those 109 projects that we've already closed. And part of this is strategic on our part. We want to make sure that they're successful. We want to make sure that they know they made the right choice, and we want to try to simplify things for them going forward. And selfishly, I want that next expansion. And so by treating companies well, paying attention to some of these longer term issues, we think it gives us a leg up to do exactly that. So how do we decide the kinds of companies that we're going to make active outreach to? I thought I'd share this little maxim because it has really guided our thinking in a lot of ways ever since M7 got started. And that's you don't get the economy that you want, you get the economy that you deserve. And it sounds a little provocative and certainly a little bit negative, but what we mean by that is there are certain assets that are in this community, and those assets support specific kinds of businesses. There is no community globally that has the assets to support every kind of business. And that's certainly true here in Southeastern Wisconsin. So I could spend a lot of time trying to chase companies that are in verticals that are sexy. There's a lot of buzz about them, but if we don't have the assets to support that, I'll have nothing to show for my activities. Again, no silver medals here. I mean, the standard that I'm held to and that M7 is held to is how many deals did you get done and what were the corresponding jobs and CapEx. So I'm not going to be aspirational about that. I'm not going to sit there and think about it'd be great if I could get, for example, a big biotech company to come here. The hard reality is that biotech, if it's going to come to Wisconsin, it's probably going to go to Madison. And it's much more likely to go to the coast than it is anywhere in the central United States. So again, it's sort of thinking about where are the ponds that have fish that like my bait? And those are the ones that we spend a lot of time on. So no secret, we've done a lot of work in terms of assessing what those assets are. Where are we really competitive in terms of what companies are looking for when they're thinking about where they might place investments? It really boils down into these 4 key verticals that you see here. So electrical component manufacturing, energy, power, automation, controls. It's an overused phrase, but it's really true here. We're the Silicon Valley of a lot of that kind of work. We continue to build a lot of machines in Southeastern Wisconsin. So whether it's motorcycles, of course, which is the one that we're probably most known for, but Komatsu and mining equipment. We make a lot of agricultural equipment, and there's a lot of lesser known equipment verticals where we are very strong. So for example, packaging manufacturing, we've got a ton of that's here in southeastern Wisconsin. You think about the two traditional economic strengths of the state of Wisconsin, it's agriculture and it's manufacturing. Where do those two come together? Food and beverage production. So this continues to be a really large segment for us. It's a real sweet spot for the region. It'd be very unusual for me and my pipeline not to have at least a few food and beverage companies that we're working with. And then lastly is financial and corporate services. I had a German company, a German executive that we were working with the last few weeks, and he was really surprised when he saw the numbers of companies that we have in this space. So it's Northwestern Mutual, Manpower is another one that people are always surprised to find out that they're headquartered here in southeastern Wisconsin, have well over 1,000 employees. But a number of others, and you see some of the logos there on the bottom. This is an area where we probably punch above our weight, and we certainly punch above our reputation in terms of where people think about these jobs being located. It's given us a shot to get in some conversations, and I'm hopeful that this is a segment that will continue to see significant growth. Okay, so I want to tell you just about a few different wins, and some of these will be familiar to most of you, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. So I'll go through these slides as quick as I can. So this lovely view, this would have been the view from the Milwaukee Harbor looking out onto the Solvay Coke site. And that was back in 2016. So it's not that long ago that what you see there on the screen is what you would have saw on a boat when you were out in the harbor. This, of course, is how one of the buildings on the campus will look in 2022 when Komatsu finishes construction on their global mining headquarter campus. So that campus, and you see an aerial of it right there, that campus is comprised of a few different elements. On the bottom right-hand side, this building, not sure if you can see my cursor, but that building right there is the building that you just saw in the previous rendering. So that's where the offices will be. There's a parking structure behind it. Over here is a training center, and also potentially looking at that as a museum. And then over here is the new production campus. Really like what this does in this particular area. We got actually a lot of national attention when this deal got announced. You don't see a lot of manufacturing moving in toward a city center. All of you know this probably better than I do. Manufacturing tends to look for easy plots of land where there's easy access to infrastructure, close access to workforce, which really means often that it's out in the suburbs. But Komatsu, by moving down here, it's been really an interesting project from that dynamic. Adds great to the neighborhood. So down on the right-hand side over here, this is where UWM has the School of Freshwater Sciences. Terrific building on East Greenfield, which is right here. And then, of course, Rockwell Automation, which has their headquarters, just kitty corner from the Komatsu campus. So a little bit of the metrics on this deal. This is a $280 million investment by Komatsu. To put this in perspective, this is the largest investment Komatsu has ever made outside of Japan in the company's history. So it shows that they're bullish on Milwaukee. They're really putting their money behind their intentions here by creating this new campus. This kept 600 jobs in southeastern Wisconsin that were in danger of potentially leaving. It also will draw 350 new jobs here. Those are the public numbers. We have hopes that this campus actually will get significantly larger than the jobs numbers that you see there on the screen. Construction, as you know, commenced already in 2020. This is a picture I snapped. I think I snapped this back in September is when this is. So you can start to see the structural steel coming out of the ground on the campus. This is looking to the southeast. And then if you've been by there recently, there's significantly more activity that's come online. So we'll go out 94 to Brookfield and Milwaukee Electric Tool. This is their campus that they have in Brookfield along Lisbon. The building you see in the foreground is the most recent addition to the campus. This company is a rocket ship. This is a company that we have worked with closely since 2011. The Brookfield campus, that was the fourth campus project that we had, campus expansion project that we had worked with them on. They've added 300,000 square feet of office and R&D space in that time, 55 million of capital investment, and they've increased their headcount on the Brookfield campus alone by 1,400 people. So fast forward then to the end of 2019. So this is a photo I snapped of a press conference that we did announcing that the company would be putting a second corporate campus in Menomonee Falls, just up the road from their Brookfield campus. So the job commitment there is 770 new jobs. This will be about $100 million investment by the company. They've bought not only a building along Flint Drive, if you know where that is, that they bought from Kohl's, but they also bought an additional 65 acres. The campus would be sized to house as much as 2.5 million square feet of office development into the future. Then back in January, so actually about this time last year, we announced that the company would be putting a new production facility in West Bend. So this is a $26 million project. Carbon fiber forging project is what this is. One of the things about Milwaukee Tool, long history here, they used to make a lot of the tools here, but had gone away a long time ago. And so all of the growth that I mentioned on the previous slides, the Menomonee Falls campus and all the Brookfield expansion, these are all white collar jobs. It's a lot of engineering talent, software people, folks that can build embedded systems, a lot of people on the product testing side, and then some of the normal corporate functions that you might expect to see, marketing, supply chain, on and on. We love this project because it really is one where they're also now starting to plant their flag in this region in terms of production capacity. So Milwaukee Tool has production capacity all over the world. They recently opened 2 factories in Vietnam, another one in Mexico. They've got production capacity in the southern part of the United States, but we have mostly missed out on a lot of that growth. Not anymore. This really gives us a chance, I think, to build more of that production capacity. You put that together with all the white collar jobs that I talked about, it's just a terrific success story. And again, a company that we are deeply proud of our relationship with them. So go down to our south into Kenosha County and specifically Pleasant Prairie. This is a rendering of a pharmaceutical production facility that's being constructed actually right now by Nexus Pharmaceuticals. So this is a company, if you know sort of the pharma space, one of the things that's always been a frustrating thing for me in the work that I do is there's a lot of pharma production that happens along I-94. It's unfortunately south of the Wisconsin border. So a lot of it in Lake County. We have made a lot of outreach to the Abbotts and the Takedas and the Baxters of the world, have never gotten anywhere, but this is the very first time that we actually got some traction. So if you're not familiar with Nexus, they too are based in Lake County in Lincolnshire, privately held manufacturer. They make injectable pharmaceuticals used in a number of different disciplines, and you see some of them there on the slide. Phase 1 is about 100,000 square feet, so that's the rendering that you saw on the previous slide. I got to change this slide because it actually has grown. Instead of 85 million on the CapEx, it's actually 100 million is what they spent. But this thing is going to fully phase out after 3 phases at 250 million of capital investment and about 200 jobs. This is a photo that I pulled this morning. They have on their website, they have one of those really cool construction cams where it shows, it updates every half an hour or so. So you can see the progress that they've made on this facility. These guys are exactly the kind of company that we want. The jobs are terrific in terms of the job counts and also the corresponding wages, but it's also a company in terms of its growth that's going on a really steep upward trajectory. So they'll have occupancy of this first phase probably sometime in the next 4 to 5 months, and then we'll start to see products manufactured from there shortly thereafter. So in the exact same park where Nexus is, just down the road, is Haribo. So they're the makers, I'm sure you know them, but if you don't, they're the makers, producers of these little bags of happiness, gummy products of every shape, color, and flavor that you can imagine. A little background on the company. They were founded in 1920 by Hans Riegel, and the company is headquartered in Bonn. So in red there, you can see how the name is derived. Family-owned company. Mr. Riegel's grandson, Hans Guido Riegel, is currently the owner, and we've dealt with him extensively, obviously, during the recruitment process. 15 production sites the company has, mostly in Germany and Turkey. Turns out there's a pretty good business in making gummy bears. It's about a $3.4 billion a year company, 7,000 employees globally. Each and every day from those 15 production sites, there's about 100 million of those bears that are produced daily. And they are today the #1 selling gummy bear here in the United States. So again, my comment about Nexus, we really like companies just like these two, and Haribo being the other one, on that upward trajectory. That means that they're going to be needing more employees. That means there's potential for more investment. These are terrific stories and exactly the ones that we want to be a part of. So this is a rendering of the facility that they actually broke ground on back in December down in Pleasant Prairie along Interstate 94. It's their very first production facility in the United States. So we're really proud and pleased about that fact. 135-acre campus. What you see in front of you there, it's actually about 600,000 square feet. The rendering doesn't capture some of the additions that they'll be putting on. Another really significant capital investment, $360 million. Day one, this facility will have 400 employees and the wages are terrific, average wage of about $56,000 per year. So fast forward to what we think will be in the future and what this campus will look like when it's fully built out. And so there'll be a number of gummy production modules that get added to it. Long and short of it, when this story is done, this will be the largest confectionery plant in all the United States. We expect the company on that first phase to be operational in 2022. So a little bit about our goals for the 2020 to 2024 campaign. So we're about just a little bit more than a year into that 5-year campaign. Our goal is 8,800 jobs, and we're pleased with the progress so far. We've closed 9 deals. Those deals encompass 2,046 jobs. On the CapEx side, our goal is $1 billion in capital expenditure. So far, we're at $377 million, so making good progress on that front as well. So I wanted to maybe just comment for a minute about 2020 and from my chair, and I suspect a lot of you felt some of the same things that we did during that time. So I remember doing this work back in 2008 when the financial crisis came. That felt to me like the world was ending. We had deals that were close at that time. Those deals went away and those deals never came back. We did not see things start to loosen up until probably 18 months later when we started to see some activity, and it really wasn't until 2010 and 11 that we started to feel like we were returning to some sense of normalcy. I have not perceived that that's what COVID is. We certainly had a couple of deals that companies decided to wait, but you've heard this a lot, but it's really true. We found that a lot of companies were just pushing the pause button. They weren't quite sure what to make of it, but many of them discovered as we went through the months that ensued that their businesses weren't harmed, and in some cases were actually helped. So we lost one deal, and it's a painful one because we were within probably 2 weeks of a lease being signed, but that didn't happen. So we lost that deal, and this is a company that I don't anticipate will come back, but all the rest of them have. And so we've got today 25 active deals in our pipeline. So these are companies that we're in deep discussions with. They are giving serious consideration to investment in southeastern Wisconsin. And the other thing I'm really glad about is a lot of the deals that we announced in 2019. So some of the companies that I've described here in my previous slides, all of those deals have continued on as planned. So there were no pauses in construction. There were no scaling down of these projects. I think companies are really bullish on the global economy going forward once COVID is over, and God help us, hopefully it's sooner versus later. I think some of the fundamentals are going to continue to be there in terms of opportunities that these companies have. And the other thing is, again, we spend so much time working with companies and targeting companies that we know will find our assets attractive. These are companies that are bullish on southeastern Wisconsin, which has been really great to see, and to see the activity that's continued as a result. So a little bit here in terms of wrapping up and talk about some things that we're thinking about and that we're working on here in the future. So specific this year, we've got 2 strategic priorities. One is, and I'm really excited about this, is that we are working on a piece of competitive intelligence software that signals whether companies are locationally active. So you might be wondering, and certainly I was when we started talking about this, well, what does that mean exactly? So what it essentially means is it's a machine learning model. So it's got a lot of our artificial intelligence built into it, and it takes databases that are proprietary that we have access to and some that we don't, but we'll get access to. It mixes it together with publicly available information, and these algorithms start showing companies that are locationally active, and most importantly, these are companies that would find our assets attractive. So in other words, back in 2016, we were cold calling Haribo. This software would have theoretically told us that a company like Haribo had a deal fall apart in Pennsylvania, a company that its US market share is growing like crazy. So in other words, real expensive to send those gummy bears over the ocean. There comes a point in time when it makes more sense to have your own production capacity. This software would have told us some of those things and would have really sharpened our saw in terms of the kinds of things that we go after. So this is a really important thing. It's something that, as far as we can tell, it doesn't exist today in economic development. We have talked to some of our competing regions about it. So we think this could be a nice competitive advantage for us going forward. The other thing is we're going to broaden our prospecting outreach to Illinois. And I don't say this with any pride. I'm a native Chicagoan. I've lived in Wisconsin for 30 years, but there's no better economic development partner to M7 than the state of Illinois. They have done very little to deal with some of their state financial problems, particularly their pension. And these are all things that get the attention of manufacturers when they're thinking about the stability in a place where they're going to make a generational investment. So if I'm going to put $50 million into a plant and I'm in Lake County today or McHenry County or even someone down by O'Hare, am I confident in the Illinois business climate? Am I confident that they aren't going to solve a lot of their problems on my back? And am I also confident they aren't going to start to sort of pull things out from underneath me in terms of stuff that I really count on to be a successful company? So whether it's infrastructure, people, education systems, these are all things that have the attention of people in Illinois, and it creates a lot of opportunities for us because you juxtapose the story of Wisconsin versus the story of Illinois. It really is compelling. We never negative sell in Illinois, but I always joke it's because I don't have to. I walk into those meetings. These are people that are already unhappy with Illinois, and they're eager to make a change. So just to give you a little perspective on some of the numbers for us, our active outreach to Illinois, so these are companies that we've cold called or companies that we've reached out in other ways in a cold fashion, that has resulted in 10 companies that have relocated from Illinois to southeastern Wisconsin. 8 of those started with a letter. It just started with us writing a letter. Now, sometimes we do these letters on our own letterhead, like the one that you see on the right. Other times we partner with the governor. So for example, Governor Evers is very helpful to us in terms of the current round of outreach. 8 of those companies came from a letter that just like the one that you see on the screen. So let me close with this. And it's just to talk a little bit about economic momentum. So when M7 was put together back in 2005, I think part of what was driving its creation was a concern that a lot of the larger company CEOs had about the economic trajectory of the region. So think about who these people are. They're people that, yeah, they're here, they have deep investments here, but they probably have deep investments in a whole bunch of different places. They have customers all over the world. They have operations all over the world. They're understanding global competitive dynamics in ways that if you're just sitting here in your own region, maybe you don't understand. And I think what they started to see back in 2005 was that our competitive position was starting to erode. And there's a few different ways that one can address that. Certainly our organization is looking at a number of different things, but the one that's really easy, it's the hardest to do, but it's the one that's easiest to understand, is are you in conversations with companies that are thinking about where they're going to place their investments? So in other words, are you even in the competition? Do they know that you're interested? Do you have a built out system that makes sure that we catch those opportunities and that we work with whoever we need to capture as many as you can? That was an answer at the time that was no. That would not be the answer today. M7 has really been put together for that exact purpose. And you see all the logos that are on the screen of some of the companies that we've worked with. You sort of think collectively about that, and fast forward to 2020 and 2021, the perception of this region is different. We are not perceived any longer as a region that's sort of scuffling along or perhaps even on a slow decline. I think we're perceived as a region where there's a lot of activity, a region where there's a lot of investment, and a region that's worthy of other companies to think about investing themselves. So I'll close on this. This is a photograph of the Hone Bridge. Governor Evers declared December 18th as Haribo Gummy Day in Wisconsin. And then we worked with the Hone Bridge guys. So Michael Hoden and Ian Abston to help us light up the bridge. And we lit it up in the 5 colors of the Haribo gummy bears. So this required me to get up at about 5:30 a couple of morning to go down and test it. But it was really a cool thing to do. And it's just another great example of a company investing here, making significant investments here. And we're thrilled about what the future might look like for them and really for the whole region. So with that, I will conclude my remarks here and happy to take questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Jim. And I think if we were in person, we could have arranged maybe some gummy bear samples. So maybe for next time. But everyone, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. Otherwise, I have about 47 of them to ask you, but I will only do this for a couple of minutes. So you talked a lot about the recruiting and the process before COVID, and then people pushing the pause button, and now, you know, people starting to come alive again and start to come back at it. Can you talk about how anything has changed over that time? Are people looking for different things, whether it be broadband or technology, or even their access to talent, or is it pretty much as it was?
That's a great question, Tracy. So the short answer is we're not quite sure yet. Sort of the upper air winds that are out there, one of them that's out there, and we're not entirely sure how that's going to impact us, is this idea of remote work. So if, for example, someone who used to work in an office downtown, now they have the ability to do that from their own home, that creates a dynamic and a choice for that individual. Do they stay in southeastern Wisconsin? Do they go somewhere else? And you can replicate this 1,000 times over everywhere else around the country. So does it mean that we become a net attractor of talent? Does it mean that we lose talent? That's one component of it. Another component of it is the real estate component. So is somebody that was going to lease up, it doesn't impact a ton of my work on the industrial side, which is a lot of what we do, because most of that production space is going to be in the workshop and in the production area. It's not going to be in the office, but we do work on deals that are office deals. And how would somebody start to think about, I needed 100,000 square feet before of office. What do I need now? And I'm not sure that we know the answer to that question. I think what we do know is that it's going to impact us. We just don't understand whether it's positive or negative and to what degree. The other thing I'll say is COVID just what we're doing right now. Now I'm looking at you on a screen. There's other people who are watching us on a screen. That has been a part of my life for the last year with prospects. So we've done a lot of meetings virtually. And there's been some in the United States where there were companies elsewhere that have driven here. And so we've been able to do some of those things in person. But then I'm working with an Australian company right now that wants to put a production facility. They cannot travel to the United States right now. And nobody is going to site a production facility without having laid their own eyes on it. So there's been a decent amount of impact that's happened that way, but we found ways around it. One of the things that we do is, So I actually had a company that was here earlier this month. And so they wanted to look at 6 different production facilities, but I did not want to be in the car with these guys. I mean, because there were 3 of them that came. And so what we did was we did it all. We had 2 cars. And as soon as we got into the car, after looking at one of the sites, I dialed them back up on the phone. And then we had a discussion just like we would have if we were in the car. But the difference is that we're separated. And when we were in the facilities, we, of course, we got on our masks and we stay away from each other. We've been respectful in that way. But yeah, it has definitely changed things, but we figured out how to make it work.
Great. No, I think that's a great answer. And we'll have to come back in a couple months and see how it all plays out. So I know we have a couple of questions coming in. What other areas throughout the Midwest do you view as the strongest competitors? And I would ask again if that's changing or evolving based on what people need in terms of space and talent.
Yeah. So there's one state I hate to see that we're competing against, and that's Indiana. Indiana has a terrific economic development organization at the state level. But more importantly, Indiana has the exact same manufacturing assets that we do. So when we sort of think about concentration of talent, when we think about tax structure that's advantageous to manufacturing, when we think about how manufacturing workers are trained and educated, all the terrific things that we have in southeastern Wisconsin are all things that exist in Indiana. So for us, that's a competitor that we always are respectful of, and it's one I'd prefer not to see. Another state, and it'd be no surprise here, is Michigan. We're actually working on a project right now of a company that's thinking about relocating out of Michigan and coming to Wisconsin. Detroit, we've certainly heard the stories about Detroit. I think some of that stuff gets a little bit overblown, but at the end of the day, the state of Michigan still has significant attractive manufacturing assets. So when we see them, that's always a one that we're always a little nervous about. Same with Ohio for pretty much the exact same reasons. I'd say the 2 states that we always like our chances when we see them show up on a list of our competitors is going to be Illinois for the reasons that I spoke of before. And also Illinois is very doable. There's companies that would look at, all right, if Illinois makes sense, for example, you want to have access to an international hub airport, or there's freight reasons because of all the railroads coming together. You can make a pretty good case. You get almost the same stuff in Wisconsin. It's just a little bit of a further drive, but you can still access some of those assets. But Illinois, by and large, is one that we have other significant advantages on. And Minnesota is another state that we always like competing against. We just tend to fare well against those states comparatively. So yeah, those are some of the dynamics.
So when you're talking about that competitive dynamic, what's the thing that pushes them over the edge? Is it the relationship? Is it the governor reaching out? Is it, is it that access to the infrastructure? Is it the open land? What is that one thing, or is it different for every client?
Yeah, we got to hire you, Tracy. You get the whole thing here. Yeah, it's all those things. I mean, these are all things that we pay close attention to. I would say, though, that the one that trumps all the others is going to be workforce. Companies have to be convinced that they're going to be able to get the talent that they need. So we're actually doing a study right now for a project, a company that's thinking of putting hundreds of jobs in southeastern Wisconsin, and they've given us a list of the positions, and we're doing a deep dive on the concentration of that talent. Where does it tend to reside? What is its education level, and how might we be able to grow it to bring more? So talent for us is really first and foremost. You got to get the incentives right. You got to get the logistics right. We have to be able to get all kinds of other things right. And a call from a governor never hurts as a way to show high-level interest. But if we can't deliver the talent, especially given the pressures companies are under now, we don't really have a shot at that deal.
We have another question, and it has to do with kind of how the deal comes together and where the prospects come from. In this business, it could come from anywhere, right? It could come from a contractor, it could come from the site selector, it could come from the broker. If we have people listening out there who have a client or a contact that's interested, what is that point of contact and how does this begin? And maybe overlay that with how you work with other economic development agencies, whether it's WEDC or other more localized economic development resources.
Sure. So more than almost anything else, this is a relationship business. And it's a business that's based on, can we get how do we understand our partners' capabilities? Do they trust us and do we trust them? And then can we earn the trust of the prospect as they're starting to think about where they're going to place investment and where they're going to locate jobs? And so we spend just an inordinate amount of time in building those relationships. And it's the old, you want a friend, be a friend. And so we spend a lot of time doing things for different entities to generate activity. So that there's a friendship and a partnership that exists between M7 and WEDC, the governor's office. And I say that irrespective of who's sitting there. We had a terrific relationship with Jim Doyle. We had a great relationship with Scott Walker, and we have a really good relationship now with Tony Evers. But having that relationship is really, really important. All of the local counties and municipalities. We also have to have really good real estate relationships. We have to good relationships with developers, because as we're sort of recognizing where there's opportunities, I have to know where we can bring in partners that can assist in getting that particular deal done. So those relationships are really foundational for us. In terms of our outreach, so I mentioned Illinois. We're about to launch another round of outreach right now. It'll be about 1,600 companies that we'll be reaching out to. We have and we actively do that. We follow up on all those letters and keep track of all that. We set meetings and we go down and talk to those companies. But we do the same thing in other places. So we do the same thing in Europe. We've gotten a decent amount of investment from Western Europe into this region. I haven't traveled much lately, but normally I'd probably be in Europe 3 or 4 times a year working directly with companies that we're pitching on this region. The other thing is we actually hire folks to help us in some markets. So in Canada, for example, if you look at Toronto, there's a huge amount of manufacturing. Ontario, Canada looks a lot like Wisconsin. It's got a similar industry mix. They've got a little more automotive than we do, but there's also a lot of machinery building that's there. So we have someone who based out of Montreal who does a lot of work for us in the Canadian market. We put all these different things together and then mix it with the last thing, which is what I mentioned towards the end of my presentation, and that's this piece of software that we're working on. We do a lot of cold calling. It's just part of the work. I don't care for it. And I'd rather have a good story to tell when I call. And so having some of that intelligence, it's not just about, would you like to think about Southeastern Wisconsin? It's, I know these 4 things about you, and I think we'd be a great fit because I want you to talk to this person, look at that asset, leverage this opportunity, and then we can have a better conversation.
I'm very excited about that software too. That sounds fascinating, especially if it's something that's proprietary and something that nobody else has access to. I want to switch gears a little bit, talking about an opportunity here, and that is with Century City. I know that you guys have been involved with this area. This how many acres is this land kind of located here on the north side of Milwaukee? Can you talk a little bit about what's happening there? I know it's been in the news a lot lately, but if you could give us a fresh perspective.
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So Century City, if you're not familiar with it, it's in the center of Milwaukee. It's about 35th and Capitol is the northern boundary of the site. This is the old A.O. Smith manufacturing facility. So if you sort of think about how production happened in the early 19th century, or excuse me, early 20th century and well into the 20th century, it was a model that was based on production located in neighborhoods, and then lots of housing would develop around the production site, and theoretically people could walk to work. And that actually functioned really well in the United States for a period of time. Now, it doesn't look like that anymore. As all of you know, we tend to put business parks out in the suburbs or in cities, and we put like uses together, and that has its own advantages and merit as well. But what has happened though at Century City is when you had as many as 14,000 people that were working there at its height. And when that went away, then all of a sudden now you have a huge piece of land in your city. So it's like 100 acres. So think about the density of Milwaukee. Not many places can you assemble that amount of acreage in one particular place, but it also, it's an opportunity. because could we rethink the whole model that I talked about earlier of can we bring more jobs into a neighborhood? And it's no secret. I mean, it's a neighborhood that's economically challenged. I'm a little biased here in this particular discussion just because I believe that neighborhood has a ton of potential. I believe that there are a lot of people who just want an opportunity. They want a chance to bring income into their families. They want an opportunity for their shot at the American dream. And I think it's a great story to tell, but it's one that we've had difficulty telling over time. So we have had one major success at Century City. So we were with the city and led the effort to recruit Talgo there, the Spanish train manufacturer. Back in, I think it was the early 2010s is when they came, but we have not been successful in finding much else. So one of the things that we're working on, there's been a few companies that we've worked closely with. Amazon is one, Strauss Veal is another one. But we want to see if we can surface more opportunities in that area, Tracy. And again, I think it's got some interesting assets. It's just a question of finding the kind of company that would require those assets. And so if we can link that up, and we've done actually a lot of work on this in the last 6 months, I think we're ready to launch something and really looking forward to working with you and others and probably some of the folks on this call to see if we can find some users for that site.
Yeah, well, and it's certainly been very dynamic, and that conversation has been dynamic. I'm sure there's a lot that's been learned, and what that looks like for the future, serving up for the future. So I want to close with one final question, and we always have to end on a high note here. And by the way, this is being recorded, and we will share your contact information. I know that you're always very responsive. But what gives you the greatest hope and optimism for our region looking forward?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. So a story that I hear from time to time is Milwaukee's like Cleveland or Milwaukee's like Detroit. And so what's sort of in that assessment that some people make is that this is a place that's going like this, that we're headed on a downward trajectory. And I talked about economic momentum before, and some of the companies that have made big investments here to counter that narrative, and I think it's really done a good job. But the other thing is, and we've done a deep dive on this in the last couple of months, is we've actually taken a look at the numbers. So specifically, we've looked at per capita income. Where did Milwaukee rank among the top 50 metros back in the mid 1960s, and where do we rank today? And it's a really interesting story. And so you start to see what are the areas that and big metros that have been consistently high in per capita income, which are the ones that have been consistently low, and then which are the ones that have moved. So which are the ones that maybe they were high in the early 70s and now they find themselves in a much more difficult position. And then conversely, folks that have done the other. And I was really, really gratified to see Milwaukee has been a top 20 metro in terms of per capita income all the way through. So the reason I mention this is we are operating here from a position of strength. This is not a region in decline. This is a region that continues to generate a lot of wealth, has a lot of really good paying jobs. So as we start to think, though, about what comes next for us, it's better to operate from a position of strength, but we still need to think about it. So is our production-centric economic model, is that a model that we're going to be able to replicate for the next 10, 20, 30 years? And I'll reference Milwaukee Tool, maybe, right? So you look at where all the jobs are coming from. These are highly educated engineers. These are people writing software code. That's where the growth is coming from. But they're also putting investments here in terms of high value manufacturing. So for us to think then and work backwards from, if it's going to be a high skill economy, which I think without question it's going to be, how are the various systems that we have in place being calibrated so that we can supply the talent that those companies need to do that? So a company like Milwaukee Tool has hundreds of job openings today. Other companies around the region, the exact same story. So our ability to bring talent here is really important to the future. It's important to maintaining that income position that we have, and I think of the prosperity that comes as a result.
I love it. The final last words is, we're operating from a position of strength and we need to always embrace that, remember that, but stay flexible, right? And innovate along with the companies and lead from that position. Jim Paetsch with M7, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for everything that you do for our region, for our industry, and for our community. Thank you.
You bet. My pleasure. Thanks, Tracy.
Have a great day.
You too.